Good evening, everyone. Let me start with a simple question. Have you ever said something in the heat of the moment, and then just seconds later wished you could take it back? Maybe it was a message you sent. Maybe it was a reaction to someone's words. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was frustration. And the strange part is, deep down you knew better. You knew the reaction wouldn't help. You knew the words would hurt someone. You knew the situation could have been handled differently. But the reaction came faster than the thinking. And that is the space where most of us live. We live in reaction. Someone criticizes us, we react. Someone disagrees, we react. Something goes wrong, we react. Someone pushes our buttons, we react. Reaction is fast. But response is powerful. Reaction is instinct. Response is leadership. And the difference between the two is the difference between a life controlled by circumstances, and a life controlled by purpose. Think about it. A reaction is immediate. It's emotional. It's automatic. It's like a reflex. Touch something hot, your hand pulls away. But when someone challenges your idea, when someone disagrees with you, when someone says something that hits your ego, that same reflex kicks in. You defend, you argue, you interrupt, you attack back. Not because you thought it through, but because your brain is trying to protect you. Here's the fascinating thing about the human mind. Our brains are wired for survival. Thousands of years ago, survival meant reacting quickly to danger. If you saw movement in the bushes, you didn't analyze it, you reacted, run. Fight, escape. Reaction kept us alive. But today, the bushes are no longer hiding predators. They're hiding comments, they're hiding opinions, they're hiding criticism. And yet our brain treats them like threats. Someone questions your work, your brain hears danger. Someone disagrees with your idea, your brain hears attack. Someone challenges your authority, your brain hears survival mode. So you react. But the greatest leaders, the most respected people, the people who truly change the world, they don't react, they respond. And that difference, that tiny moment between stimulus and action, that moment is where greatness lies. There is a space between what happens to us and how we behave. And inside that space is a choice. Reaction closes that space. Response expands it. Reaction says, I must act now. Response says, let me understand first. Reaction is loud. Response is thoughtful. Reaction is ego. Response is purpose. And here's something remarkable. You are not born with the ability to respond. You train it. Just like you train a muscle. Just like an athlete trains discipline. Just like a musician trains skill, the mind must be trained, because an untrained mind reacts. A trained mind responds. Imagine someone interrupts you during a meeting. A reactive mind thinks, they don't respect me? They're trying to prove me wrong? I need to defend myself. And before you even realize it, your tone changes, your body language changes, your words become sharper. Now the room feels tension, not because of the interruption, but because of the reaction. Now imagine the same moment with a trained mind. Someone interrupts you, your brain still notices it, but instead of reacting, you pause. Just a second. You breathe, and you ask yourself a simple question. What's actually happening here? Maybe they're excited, maybe they misunderstood something. Maybe they're trying to contribute. Maybe they're nervous. And suddenly, your response becomes different. You listen, you clarify, you guide the conversation. Same situation, two completely different outcomes. One creates conflict, the other creates leadership. The problem is we underestimate the power of that pause. That pause, everything. The pause is where wisdom lives. The pause is where emotional intelligence lives. The pause is where maturity lives. But in today's world, we've trained ourselves to eliminate the pause. Think about how fast everything is. Messages instantly delivered. Opinions instantly shared. Comments instantly posted. News instantly spread. Everything is immediate. And when everything is immediate, reaction becomes the default. But leadership has never been about speed. It has always been about clarity, and clarity requires space. Space to think, space to breathe, space to understand. Let me give you an example. Imagine someone sends you a message that sounds critical. Your first instinct might be to fire back a response. Defend yourself, explain why they're wrong, prove your point. But if you wait even just 10 minutes, something interesting happens. Your brain begins to calm down. Your perspective widens. You start seeing the situation differently. You realize maybe the message wasn't as harsh as you thought. Maybe they didn't mean it that way. Maybe there's something useful in the feedback. And suddenly the message you send back becomes constructive instead of defensive. The situation improves instead of escalating, all because of one thing. You didn't react, you responded. The world doesn't need more reactions. It needs more thoughtful responses. Think about the best leaders you've ever encountered. They don't panic under pressure. They don't explode when challenged. They don't lash out when things go wrong. They remain calm. They listen. They think. And when they finally speak, their words carry weight because they come from intention, not impulse. Responding doesn't mean being passive. It doesn't mean avoiding conflict. It doesn't mean suppressing emotion. Responding means choosing your emotion, choosing your words, choosing your action. It means you are in control. Not the situation, not the criticism, not the pressure. You. And that level of control is incredibly powerful. Because when you control your response, you control the direction of the moment. You control the energy in the room. You control the future of the conversation. Let me tell you something important. Most conflicts are not created by the problem. They are created by the reaction to the problem. Two people disagree. That's normal. But when both react, the disagreement turns into a battle. Voices or defenses go up, walls appear. But when one person chooses to respond instead of react, something shifts. The intensity drops, the conversation becomes possible. Respect enters the room. And that's leadership. Leadership is not about authority. Leadership is about influence. And influence comes from trust. People trust those who stay grounded when things get difficult. People trust those who listen before speaking. People trust those who remain composed when everyone else is reacting. Because it signals strength, real strength, not loud strength, not aggressive strength, calm strength. And calm strength is rare because it requires discipline. You have to train your mind. You have to train your patience. You have to train your awareness. Awareness is the first step. You must learn to notice when your emotions are rising. Notice when your heart rate changes. Notice when your tone begins to sharpen. Notice when your thoughts start racing. That moment is the alarm bell. That moment is the signal. That moment says, pause. And in that pause, you regain control. The greatest mistake we make is believing that our emotions control us. They don't. They inform us. Anger tells us something matters. Fear tells us something feels uncertain. Frustration tells us expectations weren't met. Emotions are signals, but they are not commands. You don't have to obey them. You can acknowledge them and still choose your response. That is emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is not about being soft. It's about being aware. Because when you are aware, you become intentional. And intentional people change the world. Think about the conversations that matter most in your life. The conversations with your family, your team, your friends, your partners. Those moments when emotions are high and the stakes feel heavy. In those moments, your reaction can damage relationships, but your response can strengthen them. One sentence spoken in anger can create years of distance. One calm response can create years of trust. So the question becomes, how do we train our minds to respond? First, slow down. Speed fuels reaction. Slowing down creates awareness. Second, breathe. It sounds simple, but breathing tells your brain that you are safe. And when the brain feels safe, it thinks clearly. Third, ask better questions. Instead of asking, how do I defend myself? Ask it. What is really happening here? What might I be missing? What outcome do I want from this moment? That question alone can transform your behavior. Because when you focus on the outcome, you stop reacting to the emotion. You start responding with purpose. And purpose changes everything. Imagine a world where more people trained their minds this way, where leaders responded instead of reacted, where conversations were guided by curiosity instead of ego, where disagreements led to understanding instead of division. That world is not impossible. It begins with a single decision. The decision to pause, the decision to think, the decision to respond. Because every single day we are given opportunities. Someone challenges us, something frustrates us, something goes wrong. And in that moment, we stand at a crossroads, reaction or response. Reaction feels powerful in the moment, but response creates real power over time. Reaction satisfies the ego. Response builds character. Reaction wins arguments. Response builds relationships. And in the long run, relationships are what truly matter. The respect of your team, the trust of your family, the confidence of those who follow you. Those things are not earned through reaction. They are earned through response. So the next time life pushes your buttons, the next time someone tests your patience, the next time frustration rises inside you, remember something simple. You are not responsible for every stimulus that enters your life, but you are responsible for every response that leaves you. And when you train your mind to respond instead of react, you become someone rare, someone steady, someone respected, someone trusted. And those are the people who make the greatest impact on the world. Not because they were the loudest in the room, but because when they spoke, they meant every word. And when they acted, they did so with intention. Train your mind. Protect the pause. Choose the response. And watch how your relationships improve. Watch how your leadership grows. Watch how your influence expands. Because in the end, the quality of your life will not be determined by what happens to you. It will be determined by how you respond to it. And this brings us to something deeper, something most people never think about. Training the brain for composure. Because composure is not a personality trait. It is not something a few lucky people are born with while the rest of us struggle with impatience, frustration, and emotional reactions. Composure is a trained ability. It is a practiced skill. It is a discipline of the mind. When we see someone who stays calm in chaos, who speaks clearly in conflict, who holds their ground when pressure rises, we often assume they are simply different from the rest of us. We assume they are naturally calm. We assume they are emotionally strong. But what we rarely see is the training behind that calmness. We rarely see the work that happens inside the mind long before the moment of pressure arrives. The brain learns the way the body learns. If you practice reacting quickly, you will become very good at reacting quickly. If you practice staying calm, you will become very good at staying calm. The brain is constantly wiring itself around the habits we repeat every single day. Every thought strengthens a pathway. Every emotional response reinforces a pattern. Over time, those patterns become automatic. They become the default way the mind behaves. That means composure is not built in the moment of crisis. It is built long before the crisis ever appears. Think about a pilot flying an airplane through heavy turbulence. The plane shakes. The wind is strong. The passengers are nervous. Yet the pilot's voice over the intercom remains steady and calm. There is no panic in their tone. There is no urgency in their breathing. There is clarity. That calmness does not appear magically in that moment. It comes from thousands of hours of training. It comes from simulations. It comes from repeated exposure to pressure in controlled environments. The brain of that pilot has learned what to do when turbulence appears. Because the brain has practiced it again and again, composure becomes the natural response. Now imagine if we trained our minds the same way. Imagine if we practiced calmness the way athletes practice movement. Imagine if we prepared the mind for pressure the same way soldiers prepare for battle. Imagine if composure became something we intentionally developed rather than something we hoped to feel when things got difficult. Because the truth is this, most people train their minds for chaos without realizing it. They train themselves to react instantly to notifications. They train themselves to respond emotionally to criticism. They train themselves to become frustrated by inconvenience. Every rushed response, every angry message, every moment of impatience becomes another repetition. And repetition builds habit. Eventually the brain becomes so accustomed to reacting that reaction becomes automatic. The mind jumps from stimulus to emotion faster than awareness can catch it. But the brain is also incredibly adaptable. It can rewire itself. It can learn new patterns. It can develop new habits of thinking and responding. This ability is one of the most powerful features of the human mind. It means that no matter how reactive someone has been in the past, they can train themselves to become composed. Training begins with awareness of mental patterns. Before the brain can change, it must first notice what it is doing. Most reactions happen because the mind moves too quickly to notice them. Someone says something that triggers irritation. Before awareness arrives, the emotion has already taken control. Words are spoken. Tone changes. Energy shifts. But when a person begins observing their own mind, something fascinating happens. They start seeing the triggers that once felt invisible. They begin noticing the situations that create tension inside them. They begin recognizing the moments when frustration rises. They become aware of the exact second when a reaction is about to happen. That awareness is the beginning of composure, because once the mind notices the reaction forming, it has the chance to interrupt it. Imagine watching a storm approaching from far away. If you see it early, you have time to prepare. You can close the windows. You can secure the doors. You can make adjustments before the storm arrives. But if you only notice the storm once it has already hit the house, the damage is harder to control. Emotions work the same way. When the brain learns to detect emotional storms early, composure becomes possible. Instead of being overwhelmed by the feeling, the mind begins to manage it. The second element of training the brain for composure is exposure. The mind becomes calm through experience. The more often it faces difficult situations without reacting, the more comfortable it becomes with pressure. Think about someone who speaks in front of an audience for the first time. Their heart races. Their hands may shake. Their thoughts move quickly. The brain interprets the situation as dangerous because it is unfamiliar. But after speaking many times, the brain begins to recognize the environment. The same situation that once created fear becomes normal. The mind relaxes because it knows what to expect. Pressure does not disappear. But the brain learns how to handle it. This principle applies to emotional pressure as well. When someone practices staying calm during small challenges, they prepare their brain for larger challenges later. Waiting patiently in a long line. Handling a disagreement respectfully, listening fully when someone criticizes an idea. These small moments become training sessions for the brain. Every time the mind chooses calmness over reaction, it strengthens the neural pathways responsible for composure. Gradually, the brain becomes less sensitive to emotional triggers. Situations that once caused irritation begin to feel manageable. Another important part of training the brain for composure is perspective. The brain reacts strongly when it believes something is a threat. But not every uncomfortable situation is actually dangerous. Sometimes the mind exaggerates the importance of a moment. A delayed message becomes disrespect. A disagreement becomes a personal attack. A mistake becomes a catastrophe. But when the mind learns to widen its perspective, the emotional intensity begins to decrease. Perspective reminds the brain that most problems are temporary. Most conflicts are solvable. Most misunderstandings are not personal attacks. When the brain sees the bigger picture, the urgency to react becomes weaker. This does not mean ignoring emotions. It means understanding them without letting them control behavior. Another training method involves strengthening patience. Patience is often misunderstood. People assume patience means passively waiting or tolerating discomfort without action. But patience is actually a form of mental strength. Patience means allowing the brain enough time to process information before deciding how to respond. When patience becomes a habit, the mind stops rushing toward immediate reactions. Instead of jumping to conclusions, the brain gathers information. Instead of defending instantly, it evaluates the situation. Patience creates space for intelligence, and intelligence improves the quality of responses. Another powerful element of composure training is emotional labeling. When people feel strong emotions, those feelings often remain vague and overwhelming. The mind simply experiences a surge of discomfort. But when the brain learns to identify emotions clearly, something interesting happens. Instead of feeling lost in the emotion, the mind steps slightly outside of it. For example, rather than thinking, "This situation is terrible," the brain begins to say, "I feel frustrated right now," or "I feel anxious about this outcome." This subtle shift creates distance between the emotion and the person experiencing it. That distance weakens the emotional intensity. The brain begins to observe rather than immediately react. Observation leads to control. Control leads to composure. Training the brain for composure also involves managing energy. A tired mind reacts faster than a rested mind. A stressed mind becomes impatient more easily. When mental energy is low, the brain becomes less capable of thoughtful responses. This is why people often react more strongly when they are exhausted, overwhelmed, or distracted. Composure requires mental resources. When the brain has enough energy, it can evaluate situations carefully. It can consider consequences. It can regulate emotional impulses. But when energy is depleted, the brain shifts into survival mode. It chooses speed over reflection. So training composure also means protecting mental clarity. It means recognizing when the mind needs rest, when attention needs focus, and when emotions need space to settle. Another crucial part of composure training involves self-talk. Inside every mind there is a quiet conversation happening constantly. The words used in that internal dialogue influence emotional reactions more than most people realize. When the mind repeatedly says things like, "This is unfair," "They shouldn't have done that," or "I can't stand this situation," emotional tension grows stronger. But when the internal voice becomes calmer and more rational, emotions begin to settle. The brain listens to its own language. If that language encourages perspective, patience, and curiosity, the mind becomes steadier. If that language encourages blame, judgment, and urgency, the mind becomes reactive. By consciously guiding internal dialogue, the brain gradually learns new ways to interpret situations. Interpretation shapes emotion. Emotion shapes response. Another powerful aspect of composure training is practicing listening. Many reactions happen because people stop listening once their emotions begin rising. Instead of hearing the full message, the brain focuses only on the parts that feel threatening. But when someone intentionally trains themselves to listen longer than their impulse to respond, they gather more information. Often the meaning behind someone's words becomes clearer. Sometimes the tone changes. Sometimes the intention becomes more understandable. Listening fully reduces misunderstanding. Reduced misunderstanding reduces emotional reactions. Listening also signals respect. When people feel heard, conversations become calmer. Conflict decreases. Cooperation increases. Composure spreads from one person to another. When one person remains calm, others often follow that example. Another training method involves mental rehearsal. The brain does not always distinguish strongly between imagined experiences and real experiences. When someone visualizes themselves responding calmly in a difficult situation, the brain begins practicing that behavior. Athletes use this technique frequently. Before competition, they imagine themselves performing with precision. They mentally rehearse the movements they want their body to execute. The brain learns from those mental repetitions. The same approach can strengthen composure. A person can imagine receiving criticism and responding thoughtfully. They can picture themselves handling frustration with patience. They can mentally rehearse calm behavior during challenging conversations. When the real moment arrives, the brain recognizes the pattern. Because it has practiced the response before, composure becomes easier to access. Over time, these practices reshape the brain's automatic tendencies. Instead of reacting instantly, the mind pauses naturally. Instead of escalating conflict, it seeks understanding. Instead of becoming overwhelmed by pressure, it maintains clarity. And as composure becomes stronger, something remarkable happens. Confidence grows. Because a person who trusts their ability to remain calm no longer fears difficult situations. They know they can handle disagreement. They know they can navigate pressure. They know they can think clearly when emotions rise. That confidence changes how they move through the world. Conversations become more productive. Relationships become more stable. Decisions become more thoughtful. The brain begins to operate from a place of steadiness rather than urgency. And steadiness is powerful. A composed mind influences the environment around it. In tense situations, calmness becomes contagious. When others feel the stability of someone who remains grounded, their own reactions begin to soften. This is how composure becomes leadership, not through authority, but through presence, not through control, but through stability. A trained brain becomes an anchor in moments of uncertainty, and people naturally gravitate toward anchors when storms appear.